You are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 797. It's also day 63 of the ceasefire, such as it is, and I'm reporting this on the 11th of December, 2025. Of course, it's not a ceasefire. That's why we say such as it is. There's in more than 700 military actions since October the 11th. The Israeli military has killed at least 379 Palestinians in Gaza and wounded over 1,000 in stark violation of the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement that the United States is the principal, if not sole, guarantor of. We will be back next week with focus on Gaza, but this week we're going to take a look at the West Bank, where the Israeli military has been carrying out one of its largest military operations in the last year. Of course, we're now almost a year on from more than 30,000 Palestinians being evacuated, ethnically cleansed, displaced from the refugee camps in the north of the West Bank, particularly Jenin, Tulkarm, and Nur Shams, during what Israel called Operation Iron Wall. And of course, it's important to note that Iron Wall had the full participation of Palestinian Authority security forces. So the PA, obviously, longtime collaborator force, but now the PA involved in an operation that has led to the displacement from the refugee camps of the Palestinian population that the PA purports to represent, though, of course, their mandate has long expired and they have no legal authority. They're still willing to work with the Israelis on the ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. Let's take a look at maps. So we'll start with maps. Maps on the West Bank are deeply political maps, and you could show a whole bunch of them that are marked up like this map we're showing here that shows areas A, B, and C. These are Oslo peace process relics. Area A is Palestinian control. You can see it on that map in the green. Area B is a intermediate control, joint control, which is, of course, not very joint because the PA is fighting the Palestinians themselves. And then Area C is area under Israeli control, and that's the area that continues to expand. And the settler attacks, which we won't get into on this program on the resistance, but you could do another segment on its own about settler attacks, because the settlers use that Area C area to carry out their attacks and to continue to shrink Palestinian areas. This military operation that Israel launched, they launched it on November 26th in the West Bank, raiding over 220 sites. That's up from the normal daily average of about 40 invasions a day, raids into the West Bank. So it's a higher tempo, but there is no in-between raids. The West Bank is subjected to 24/7, 365 days a year of essentially policing operations that are executed by military units and death squads. And that is the main difference between the resistance in the West Bank and the resistance in Gaza. In Gaza, the warehousing, the ghettoization of Gaza, allowed a modicum of sovereignty and autonomy inside Gaza. It allowed the resistance to build up its capabilities. It allowed them to root out collaborators over the course of the 20 years that the Qassam Brigades built the effectively the national army that we have seen fight for the past 2 years. The West Bank doesn't have the ability to stockpile and to build up because they're constantly subjected to raids of all ages. Children are arrested outside of their schools, all the way up to anyone seen to be participating in any kind of political activity is arrested. We'll go over some of those numbers as we go on in this program. The Israeli military called the operation 5 Stones, and they said in a statement, before ground forces entered, the Air Force struck sites to seal off the area. After airstrikes, security forces began searching dozens of structures and questioning suspects. And according to the United Nations Office of OCHA, the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, that monitors this kind of activity. Their office reported that since the 7th of October 2023 to the beginning of this operation, Five Stones, that the Israeli security forces had killed over 1,030 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Among those, 223 children. They also wounded 10,000, more than 10,000, and detained 20,500 people in the last 2+ years in the West Bank. So when we look at this map that's on the screen right now, you can see it's essentially all of the Palestinian areas in green are isolated. And this next slide will show you, I've showed you this one before, but it's a good allegory for the West Bank. This is a map done by Julien Boussac from Funambulist magazine. And it shows the West Bank, Palestinian areas, as an island archipelago. It's a sort of an allegory to describe the way the situation is. It's an archipelago, but the Palestinians don't have boats because they can't move from one area to another. Of course, there's multiple permit schemes in the West Bank that prevent that. There's apartheid roads that split the territory up and make travel very difficult. All of these things are realities for the Palestinian civilian population, but they also have significant implications for the resistance. The ability to transport weaponry, to share weaponry among the different regional battalions is deeply restricted by this. And of course, there's also an 800-kilometer concrete wall, 8-meter high concrete wall that runs around these territories. It doesn't separate, the wall does not separate so-called Israel from the West Bank. It separates Palestinian communities from other Palestinian communities. The wall wraps around Palestinian communities. It doesn't go along the border of 1948. So important to note. And this map, I think, is a useful one. But let's take a look at another one, because you could overlay many of these different types of maps. This is another OCHA map. This is about settler attacks. And you can see on this map very clearly that the whole eastern edge of the West Bank, the whole Jordan Valley, is a complete closed military zone, except for those little islands, again, archipelago islands inside the closed military zone. So the entire eastern side is cut off, and then there's the wall on the western side, and the wall runs through it. So we're looking here at a map that's so detailed, it's very difficult to even point out what we're looking at. But on this next map, I've shown it a little bit more clearly with a zoom in. This is a zoom in on the Nablus area. And we're looking at here the way that map looks when you look at it close up. We're looking at apartheid roads that only Israelis can travel on. The red area or pink area that you're looking at, that's Israeli settlements. The blue areas that surround those settlements are the buffer zones that surround the settlements. So you see basically Gaza, 100 Gazas inside the West Bank. You can see the way that blue, the closed military zone around the settlements, you can see how the roads travel through that area. And that's the way the apartheid roads function. There's, of course, checkpoints, permanent checkpoints, flying checkpoints that show up at any given moment. There's partial checkpoints that are occasionally staffed. There's partial checkpoints with open gates, with locked gates. There's closed roads. There's observation towers that you can see on this map. Earth mounds, roadblocks, earthen walls, road barriers, trenches. All of these are used to separate Palestinian areas and to reinforce Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Again, we could do an entire segment just on this map that you're looking at right now. It's such a deeply political map, the way that Israel has carved up the West Bank. And this is what makes the discussion in the Western media about two-state solutions, that ship has sailed on this land. This land has already been carved up. with the goal of preventing Palestinian contiguity, continuity of the communities, continuity of social life, as well as all other aspects of life. It's difficult to get to hospitals through these checkpoints. And all of this is the context in which the resistance is forced to operate, along with the 24/7, 365-day raids that happen in the dozens each and every single day. That being said, if we look at this next slide, you can see the West Bank resistance is still operating. This is a video by 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿 in the West Bank from the other day, and you can see them loading IEDs here. The two principal IEDs that are used in the West Bank are the Tufan, the Flood, and that is the large explosive that is a ground-based penetration. We're watching them be detonated against army vehicles over the past 2 years. I've shown you all of those clips on this show before, but they make 𝐓𝐡𝐞, which is a directed IED. The Tufan is the buried in the road IED, much heavier, the one you're seeing right now being filled. But they also make grenades and anti-personnel explosives that are used in the context of the battle in the West Bank, where, unlike in Gaza, the Israelis never leave their tank. At this point in Gaza, they're in the West Bank, they're walking on foot, which makes hand grenades and self-propelled explosives meaningful. 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿's field commander spoke about this the other day at the launch of the operation, just after the launch of the operation. He said, for several weeks, the leaders of the Zionist enemy have been trying to create weak and pathetic field achievements in an attempt to break the fighting spirit of our resistance and the heroes of our people by assassinating the fighters of 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿 in the cities and towns in the occupied West Bank. We implemented appropriate plans suited to the field data and conditions after studying and analyzing the behavior of the enemy army and sensitive information which we obtained from drones that our fighters dealt with using appropriate firepower, shooting down a number of them in the Tubas governorate and the Al-Fara refugee camp area in recent weeks. Our fighters in the Beit Umar company in Al-Halil in Hebron, the heroes of the Nablus brigade, were able to preempt expected Zionist action and surprise it with ambushes and explosive devices, which caused a shock among the enemy's soldiers and officers, and the enemy admitted a number of them were injured. The moment the enemy announced the launch of the failed operation, which he called 5 Stones, our fighters were laying in wait for them, and in the first hours managed to disable a D9 military bulldozer, targeting it with a Tufan ground explosive device, and disabling a military jeep by detonating a 𝐓𝐡𝐞-type directed explosive device in the town of Tamun. The enemy thought he would break the will of the fighters by assassinating our brothers Yusuf Assasa and Al-Muntasir Abdullah in Jenin, but our mujahideen rubbed their noses in the dust of the Jenin countryside and smashed their stones with explosive devices that were prepared and planted in advance on the routes where the enemy was expected to pass. We reassure our people, the 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿's commander says, that our capabilities are fine and our fighters are highly prepared and vigilant, and we will not allow the enemy to create a new reality in the cities and towns of the West Bank. We renew our call to the Palestinian Authority's security services to stop pursuing our fighters and immediately release those detained fighters that are tortured in your prisons, to allow them to carry out their sacred duty to defend our people and their property against a war of annihilation targeting Palestinian existence in all of Palestine. That's the statement from 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿's commander in the West Bank. You can see here there on the video that we've been looping that's the grenades that they're making. So they're making all 3 of those devices that you saw used in this battle. And on the final screen here, it says, "You'll never know calm," in the sense of peace of mind. There'll never be safety in the West Bank. The resistance will remain. If we look on the next slide, number 6 here, this is from the inside of the cockpit of Israeli armored vehicles. You can see the detonation of explosives here. During the operation, dozens of field reports, more than 50 field reports, detailed operations in Jenin, Nablus, Tubas, and Halil, Hebron. In Jenin, in the Northwest Bank, there was 10 Sigil operations, 13 Tufan operations, 9 firefights, and 5 defensive ambushes targeting a Namr troop carrier, a D9 armored bulldozer, as well as the West Bank only armored vehicle, the Panther, which they do not use in Gaza because it's not heavily armed enough to deal with the Shawad that the Palestinian fighters in Gaza have. In Tubas, 2 grenades and 2 firefights and downing of IDF quadcopters. In Nablus, 2 IEDs, 2 grenade operations, and multiple anti-personnel ops, along with 2 firefights. And in Halil and Hebron, 5 grenades and 5 grenades and explosive devices, as well as 5 firefights. 4 soldiers at least were wounded in those 50 operations. But like we know in Gaza, the Israelis are obfuscate the casualty rates. So it's difficult to know if that's the true number. This next slide, number 7, you can see the construction. This is the Israeli military now showing their successes, what the Saraya commander called their pathetic achievements. You can see there the hand grenades that were being used. The Israelis are bragging about that. They say in this statement, IDF troops from the Commando Brigade and regional brigades and the Israeli Air Force, together with Shabak and the Israeli Border Police, completed an operation to counter terrorism in the northern Samaria area over the past 2 weeks. During the operations, troops eliminated fighters, apprehended dozens of wanted suspects, and questioned many additional suspects. The troops also located and confiscated hundreds of thousands of shekels, dozens of weapons, including pistols and Carlo-type improvised weapons, ammunition, and knives. This is the IDF statement. In addition, more than 30 targeted airstrikes were conducted by the Israeli Air Force. And further, they also located inciting materials and Hamas supporting books. So they're raiding the West Bank, stealing money, grabbing a few pipe bombs, and bragging about taking books off people's bookshelves in the West Bank. So this is somewhere less than impressive for the Israeli military. We look at the next one, we can see, are we on number 8? The homemade grenade. Yeah, you can see the fighter here in his tactical vest holding one of those homemade grenades that was found in a building in Jenin. So these are very minimal accomplishments. But of course, you can see these fighters are fighting with what they can. They're manufacturing their own weaponry the same way as in the Gaza Strip. And you can see the fighter there in his tactical belt has one of those grenades ready for use. The next slide, you can see another West Bank innovation. This is called the Carlo. It's a homemade gun that is created by spare parts from other guns and metallurgy that's done in foundries to create these weapons. And these weapons are used throughout the West Bank, building their own guns to carry out the battle in the West Bank. So that's the Carlo, and Israel's bragging about finding one of those during this widespread operation that they're bragging about. This next slide, 9b here, really shows you the accomplishments of the military. We're looking here at 3 pocket knives, sub pocket knives. They're smaller than pocket knives, and they're bragging about it. The one on the right, clearly homemade, which is impressive. But the other 2 are, 2-inch long blades. The one looks more like a nail file than it does a weapon. But this is it. This is what the Israelis, this was the culmination of their operation. So they showed us a couple of homemade guns, a few homemade hand grenades, and here we're seeing homemade guns and pocket knives that you'd use for opening mail. So dishonorable operations were not limited to these. Of course, the Israelis also went around and rearrested people released in the prisoner exchanges over the past year and a half. Mohammed al-Arda was infamously arrested the other day in Jenin. He is one of the 6 fighters that escaped from Gilboa prison in the Freedom Tunnel escape, where a spoon was used to dig out into the tunnel system underneath the prison, and they made it out free and were free for many days. When Mohammed al-Arda was released back to Jenin, the first thing he said when he got off the bus was, "To the people of Gaza, O people of Gaza, you are the most honorable and noble people. You are the crown on our heads and the head of this nation. If there is anything to be proud of in this history of these nations, it is the Gaza Strip," he proclaimed. And the operation of the Gilboa prison escape was organized by Mohammed al-Arda's cousin, Mahmoud al-Arda. The Israelis also arrested Mohammed Naji Sabha. He is a author and military science writer who spent many years in prison. He's wrote a book on guerrilla warfare. Again, so very dishonorable to be re-arresting people that were released in a prisoner exchange and exchanged for Israeli soldiers, and to then re-arrest them. It just casts doubt on all of these deals. And people who follow this show every week will know that that's not surprising, but it is dishonorable, and it makes it very difficult to have any serious negotiation with the enemy of the Palestinians. Let's take a look at this next one, because really what the Israelis have been doing over the last year, this is a map from the Israeli military. This map came from the 877th Judea and Samaria Division. This is courtesy of Abdallah, who's filing a complaint for war crimes and crimes against humanity against the Israeli generals who are in charge of this operation. But you can see this is the original document, so it's difficult to see, but you can see that there's hundreds of dots on this map of the Jenin refugee camp that you're looking at. This map was handed out to people in Jenin. They were given 24 hours to leave the camp entirely with what they could carry on their backs. We reported on this at the time in January of last year. They left and they left the camp so that the Israeli military could destroy the camp. And along with this map came this order from the Israeli military that says, "By virtue of my powers as a military commander and my other powers under any law, and since I believe that the order is necessary for purely military purposes, I hereby order the following. I hereby order the demolition of the buildings. In the process of demolishing the buildings, the process of demolishing the buildings shall begin within 24 hours from the time of the signing of this notice." That is what people got in Jenin and were forced out to carry out only what they had on their backs. And at the time, Major General Avi Bluth, who's the chief of the Central Command, which is the regional command for the West Bank, he said in April, quote, "We are operating in the refugee camps and carrying out significant operations that change the character of the entire area." Smotrich followed up that by saying the perception of security must change. Tulkarm must be reduced to ruins. So we're looking at Jenin here. If we look at the next satellite maps, we can see here the Jenin refugee camp, and then we're going to see it's going to fade in to show you the number of buildings that were targeted in the Jenin camp. Hundreds. It's unknown because the number that they said was dwarfed. And there you can see the reason why. The reason why is to cut those corridors through the map. So there's the houses that you're seeing, and there's the corridors. And cutting these corridors has been a dream for the Israeli military, going back to the Second Intifada when their forces were defeated in the Jenin refugee camp in 2002 in the Battle of Jenin. They were killed in the alleys. More than 24 soldiers were killed, 13 in one day. That was the most Israeli soldiers that had died in a single day going back to the 1982 Lebanon War. And they were killed in the alleys of Jenin, particularly one ambush in the bathtub that is called area of Jenin, where soldiers were lured into the alleys and attacked from all directions, killing 13 in seconds. And since that day, they have wanted to, well, the response to it at the time was, of course, to demolish the Jenin refugee camp. And then for years, there was battles between Israel and the UN about trying to rebuild the Jenin camp to have these routes, to have routes through the camp that tanks can drive on so that soldiers can be driven right up in their armored troop carriers, open the door, and they can go right into a house. They don't have to walk on foot through the alleys of Jenin, through the alleys of resistance, decades of resistance from these alleys of Jenin that haunt the Israelis. And so they have taken something, they couldn't pull it off after 2002 to widen the roads in the Jenin camp. And before the genocide in Gaza, it was considered a red line to ethnically cleanse refugee camps, have people out of their homes indefinitely, and then to completely just redraw the routes through the camp. But of course, the genocide had no red lines, and Israel saw that. They adapted to the fact there was no red lines. You can see that happening all throughout the Gaza war as they escalated the destruction, wanton destruction, and war crimes. So they saw that, and they saw, we have a chance to do something historic in the West Bank. This is the moment to strike. And they did. And they did it right after the ceasefire in Gaza. They moved in and evacuated people out of these camps. 32,000 people have been driven out of the camps. And a lot of people ask when we report on this, where do they go? In Jenin and Tulkarm and Nur Shams, people went to community centers. They went to mosques. They rented flats in nearby villages. They moved in with families. But we're almost a year on from that. They have been displaced for that year. If we look at the next map, you can see the same thing happening in the Nur Shams camp. You see the outline of the Nur Shams camp that we're looking at, densely populated, because there was no room for these refugee camps to grow as the Palestinian population grew from the late 1940s and early 1950s when these camps were established. And now you can see in Nur Shams there, those routes have been cut through Nur Shams. That allows the Israeli military to cut the camp into sections, and it allows their troops to move through the camp. So policing operations carried out by ethnic cleansing. There's one more example of it in the Tulkarm camp that you can see here coming up. And again, we've dissolved these three images, satellite images, together so you can see, again, densely populated. You can see how tight those alleyways are. And those are the alleyways of Palestine. Those are the alleyways of resistance that haunt the Israelis. And there you can see them cutting it up again to make roads both directions, cutting up the camp with strips. You can see also in this last shot of Tulkarm, a better satellite image, number 14. Yeah, this is a high quality satellite image where you can clearly see where they have bulldozed people's homes, family homes that have 3 generations living in them, refugee homes, and those people have been displaced again to make those roads. And where they'll come back to live with that many houses destroyed is unclear at this point. So under the fake achievements of military operation, they're carrying out this ethnic cleansing and destruction of the refugee camps. Last week on the show, Nora reported on this segment where we saw the field execution of 2 fighters in Jenin, Yusuf Ali Assasa and Al-Muntasir Abdullah. They were executed after they had fired their last bullets. They fought until their last bullets. There was a Reuters cameraman filming the battle. And then we saw on film the fighters come out. They're out of bullets. They have no weapons. They're unarmed. And the Israeli soldiers execute them in the streets, which was an obvious field execution. You know, the United Nations Human Rights Office called it a summary execution. In any case, we're not going to show that field execution. It's easy to find if you want to see it. It's appalling and consistent with everything we know about Israeli cowardice. But we're going to show the video of the fighters themselves. This is Yusuf Ali Assasa. He's addressing the fighters in Jenin. He's a commander of the Jenin brigades. We're looking at him addressing his fighters in the camp here. And in this video, he says that the resistance and the Palestinian people, he says of the resistance and the Palestinian people that the path of liberation is long and costly, but we will be victorious. We will be freed from this occupation, and we tell them we will continue on this path no matter the cost. Our martyrs, the ones before us and the ones that came after, are the beacons of light that guide the path to liberation. We will continue on this path no matter the cost. So that's Yusuf Ali Assasa. He was field executed in Jenin and caught on camera. And of course, there will be no repercussions for Israel at the current moment, but that'll just add that case to the file for the Hague trials that necessarily have to come out of these 2+ years of Israeli crimes. So that's the fighter addressing his fighters in the camp. And that is the resistance report for day 797 of Israel's genocidal war.